Hey everyone, my name is Josh.
And my name is Daniel.
And we are mentors here at IUSM. Welcome to our first ever episode of Mentos. We're starting a series of bite-sized talks where we spend a little bit of time to scratch the surface of big topics. And the question we have for today is belief in God only for the uneducated?
Yeah, I think a lot of people nowadays have the view that religion is just for the uneducated, for people who don't know any better, or like how Karl Marx describes religion as the opium for the masses.
Yeah, for me, what comes to mind is the angry street preacher holding a big poster up and shouting, "You're going to hell if you don't repent." And I'm from Hong Kong, and there's a saying in Cantonese, it's like, 你講耶穌, which literally means like talking about Jesus. But it's actually a slang for the hypocritical person who is just all talk and no substance.
Yeah, so that may be a common perception nowadays. But actually, when we look at the world around us, we see that there are many highly educated, intelligent, and influential people who not only believe in God, but are also devout Christians. And you may know some of them, like Isaac Newton, who developed calculus and classical physics, and amongst other scientific discoveries. There's also Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who is considered to be the father of modern China. And there's C.S. Lewis, the famous Oxford scholar who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia.
And there are so many modern examples as well, like George Lemaitre, the father of the Big Bang Theory. And one contemporary I'd like to highlight is Francis Collins. He is a world-renowned geneticist who led the Human Genome Project to sequence the entire human genome. And he's also been the director of the National Institute of Health for over a decade. But moreover, he's also a devout Christian, and he investigated the question of God. And for a while, he worked as a doctor, and he shares about his encounter with an elderly woman with terminal illness. And she asked him this big question. So why don't we roll that clip?
And then she asked me the most simple question. "Doctor, what do you believe?" And I realized I didn't know the answer. I felt uneasy. I could feel my face flushing. I wanted to get out of there. The ice was cracking under my feet. Everything was all of a sudden muddled by this simple question. "Doctor, what do you believe?" So that troubled me, and I thought about it a little bit and realized what the problem was. I was a scientist, or at least I thought I was, and scientists are supposed to make decisions after they look at the data, after they look at the evidence. I had made a decision that there was no God, and I'd never really thought about looking at the evidence. That didn't seem like a good thing. It was the decision that I wanted the answer to be, but I had to admit I didn't really know whether I had chosen the answer on the basis of reason or whether because it was a convenient form of perhaps willful blindness to the evidence. I wasn't sure there was any evidence, but I figured I'd better go find out because I didn't want to be in that spot again. So what did I do? Well, I figured there are those world religions. What do they believe? I better find out. And I tried to read through some of those sacred texts, and I got totally confused and frustrated. And there was no Wikipedia to help me either. It's much easier now. So at a loss, I knocked on the door of a minister who lived down the road from me in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and said, "I don't know what these people are talking about, but I figure it's time for me to learn. So, okay, you must be a believer. At least I hope you are. You're a minister. Let me ask you some questions." So I asked him a bunch of probably blasphemous questions, and he was gracious about that. And after a while said, "You're on a journey here trying to figure out what's true. You're not the first one. And in fact, I've got a book here written by somebody who went on that same journey from an academic perspective. In fact, it was a pretty distinguished Oxford scholar. He found around him there were people who were believers, and he was puzzled about that, and he set about to try to figure out why people believe, and figured that he could shoot them down. And, well, why don't you read the book and see what happened? And in the first 2 or 3 pages, I realized that my arguments against faith were really those of a schoolboy. They had no real substance. And the thoughtful reflections of this Oxford scholar, whose name, of course, is C.S. Lewis, made me realize there was a great depth of thinking and reason that could be applied to the question of God. And that was a surprise. I had imagined faith and reason were at opposite poles. And here was this deep intellectual who was convincing me quickly, page by page, that actually reason and faith go hand in hand. I won't go through the whole chronology as it actually happened, but let me summarize for you the kinds of arguments that ultimately brought me around to the position of recognizing that belief in God was an entirely satisfying intellectually event, but also something that I was increasingly discovering I had a spiritual hunger for.
And Colin goes on to explain, what persuaded him to believe in God. And we'll cover more of that in future episodes too.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that Francis Collins says that the reason and evidence can be applied to the question as big as the existence of God. And he came to the conclusion that faith and reason actually go hand in hand and work well together.
And I see he's among just one of many bright minds who see Christianity as an intellectually satisfying and defensible worldview. And like Collins, I also experienced engaging with thoughtful and highly educated Christian believers. And when I first came to Cal, I felt like I had Christianity and God all figured out, and I didn't believe in God. Even though I went to church growing up, and I actually double majored in psychology and sociology, I thought I knew a good deal about religion and human psychology. But in my junior year, I got to know not only Berkeley grads, but also PhDs and professors who are also firm believers in God. And talking with them and actually understanding the reasons for their beliefs made me reconsider my own assumptions about God and ultimately explore more.
Wow, yeah, so it seems like there are a lot of highly educated and very intelligent people who believe in God and actually practice religions like Christianity. However, I do know of some pretty smart and famous people who don't believe in God. So how come there's this discrepancy?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think we can find some answers in Colin's story too. Remember when the lady asked him if he believed in God, he considered himself an atheist. But he had never actually fully explored the question of whether or not there was a God. So maybe it does come down to not taking the time to properly investigate. Another interesting thing is, in the process of investigating Christianity, Francis Collins was a bit scared of finding out if there is actually a God. It's kind of puzzling to think at first, but it makes sense. If there actually is a God, then we have to answer to him and maybe to listen to him. And there's a really well-known atheist philosopher, maybe you know him, Thomas Nagel. He puts it this way: I want atheism to be true, and am made uneasy by the fact that some of the most intelligent and well-informed people I know are religious believers. It isn't just that I don't want to believe in God, and naturally I hope that I'm right in my belief. It's that I hope there is no God. I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. So even if there are good reasons for believing in God out there, it seems like some people just don't want to hear them. And I think Nagel is being very honest there about his motivations behind his belief in atheism.
Wow, that's very interesting. So it sounds like sometimes the reasons people don't believe in God don't really have to do that much with level of education. And in these cases, it's more about one's openness and desire to investigate and consider the evidence.
And that's what we try to do here at IUSM as well. Aside from the fun and the games, we gather together to try to understand faith, through logic and reason, and draw insights from the rich intellectual history of the Bible, and to also hear people's personal experience as well. And we hope you'll join us on this intellectually enriching quest of exploring Christianity together.
And that's all the time that we have today for today's episode of Mentos. Hope that you guys can join us for future episodes.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.